The angriest guy you'll ever see is a headhunter that lands you 3 jobs in Chicago, all for over $200,000, and you turn them all down.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales.
Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartmann. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you will be aware that I often read or we talk about things that I have written in the past. And we love mixing those in, these different stories, and hopefully some different insights along with those that we get from our guests where we have these interviews. However, this episode is different because undoubtedly 400 plus episodes, this is the earliest piece of writing we have ever shared. What am I talking about? Well, as a segue to the podcast that will be coming out tomorrow, featuring Mr. Bill Heuer, co-founder and owner of the Countertop Factory and other businesses of which we will talk about, I stumbled upon a paper that I submitted in my MBA program back in the first quarter of 2011 when I was taking an entrepreneurship class. Apparently, it was 5870, New Venture Creation, taught by some, I'm sure he's a wonderful man, Professor Kravitz, of whom I have very little recollection. So for the class in week 5, we had to interview an entrepreneur, ask them a series of questions based on whatever the hell we were learning in class, and then write a paper on that. So in cleaning out my office in December of 2023, I stumbled across this paper and I reached out to Bill Heuer and his co-founder, Geoff Gran, who you will meet in the story. And I said, did I ever send this to you? And apparently I wasn't very thoughtful at that point in my life. As you will hear, we went out. They were very generous with their time and their insights. I recorded them. I submitted the paper. I never showed it to them. So I showed it to them, 13 years later, and it began a dialogue that ended, for the moment, recently on my trip to Chicago, where I got to sit down and interview Mr. Bill Heuer. So I thought reading this paper that I submitted on March 3rd, 2011, what grade did I get? I have no idea. That is lost to history. However, listening to this, I think you will get something from it. It's a relatively enjoyable read. I have improved over time, but I thought, all things considered, this was pretty good. And this is going to be a wonderful prelude to my current day conversation with Bill Heuer that is coming out tomorrow. So without further ado, please enjoy this retrospective 2011 paper I wrote on the Countertop Factory in the Chicagoland area. And now they are in Arizona, founded by Mr. Bill Heuer and Geoffrey Gran. As always, thank you for listening. Splitting the orange in half, I dropped one part of the crescent in my blue moon. No napkin or coaster to be found, I glanced around the empty table, and the empty bar for that matter, looking for a suitable location to discard the second half. Showing up is half the battle for any aspiring entrepreneur. Showing up on time is even better. But Geoff Gran, co-founder of the Countertop Factory Midwest, trailed off as he approached the high-top table at Pints Bar and Grill in Elmhurst, Illinois. This bar was within walking distance of his home, a fact that would prove useful 8 hours later. This is so typical. That guy would show up late to his own funeral. He call? He had not. The he in question was Bill Heuer, Geoff's business partner, co-founder, and best friend since childhood. Just watch. He'll show up late, just start preaching about running your own business. No apology, nothing. On cue, Heuer appeared out of nowhere, talking way too loudly for the empty bar. 2 things. Get a good partner and never stop believing in yourself. Now, seriously, Hartmann, if you get a solid partner, that's a huge piece of the puzzle already done for you on day 1. 10 minutes later, Heuer had not stopped talking, but I was jotting notes. He was on a roll. After Georgetown grad school and 8 years at Procter & Gamble, I just knew that I wanted to start a company with Geoff. I was confident in what I could do, and by the time Geoff was 33, he had already been a vice president, started his own medical supply firm, got $6 million in VC money, and sold off his shares, so I was really sure what he could do. We've been best friends since we were 14, so we just made a decision to build something together. True, we didn't know shit about countertops, but that didn't matter. I decided to step in and give him a breather. How intense was the competition in 2003 when you started? I asked. There was a bunch of players, but it was highly fragmented. There wasn't any one dominant player, and we knew the home building industry was growing like crazy. And so once we decided to work together, the countertop gig my brother-in-law had started began to look a lot more interesting. It all sounded so natural, so organic, the way Gran and Heuer recounted the birth of the Countertop Factory Midwest. It sounded as if it was inevitable. Gran was a third-generation entrepreneur. Yeah, it was the unspoken expectation. My grandfather, my father, my uncle, and even my mom. After I left for college, everybody ran their own business. After attending Tulane and seriously considering a medical degree, he entered the medical supply field. When bureaucratic restructuring ousted his boss and mentor, Gran joined him in starting a new venture. They played the cards they were dealt. They stayed in the industry and leveraged their contacts to focus on supplying medical equipment for new hospitals, an idea they had planned to introduce under their previous employer. With clients from day one, the new firm was cash flow positive immediately. A business plan ensued, and within 6 months, they had a $6 million investment from a medical-focused venture capital firm. We gave away 80% of the company, but we were still making $150,000 a year. There wasn't a whole lot of risk. Within 2 years, our revenue was $25 million. Sick of the travel and interested in something new, Gran cashed out in 2002. Heuer's grand plan was not entrepreneurial. Heuer had always planned on going corporate. I went to Georgetown to get a job at Procter & Gamble. Then I was working at Procter & Gamble to get a CMO, a chief marketing officer job, somewhere else. But 2 things to note here. Heuer grabbed the beer from my pursed lips, forcing it on the table. My pen was jammed into my hand. Write this shit down, Hartmann. First, P&G is great, but if your wife makes up her mind Cincinnati sucks, well, there ain't a whole lot you can do to change that. Second, the angriest guy you'll ever see is a headhunter that lands you 3 jobs in Chicago, all for over $200,000, and you turn them all down. Trust me when I say this. That guy will be very pissed. Heuer's wife was demanding a return to Chicago as Gran was exiting his medical supply startup. After we decided to do something together, then it was just looking around for the right opportunity. In 2001, Heuer's brother-in-law, Kenny, started the original Countertop Factory in Charlotte, North Carolina. 2 years later, the stories of Kenny's success were getting around the family. Confident in his system and the growing home building industry, Kenny urged Heuer and Gran to spend some time with him. After about a month's worth of time, over 90 days, spent dissecting the fundamentals of countertop production and install, Heuer and Gran self-funded TCF Midwest. I ask about the 4 anchors in the venture screening process. Quick side note here, I Googled 4 anchors in the venture screening process and nothing came up. Some venture capital firms that focused on boating came up, which was unhelpful, by the way. So I don't really know what these are, but I do go into a little bit of detail. So let's ignore that for the moment, but I think we can kind of deduce what the 4 anchors are. So I'll highlight those as we go. Gran nodded his head effusively. We didn't think of it in those terms, but the first 2, add significant value and remove pain points, which these sound right. Those were obvious. Builders were telling us there was an opportunity because we could commit to delivering tops in 4 days when everyone else was 10 or more. We couldn't understand why. A top can be made in 1 day. What is going on the other 9 or 10? And with the volume builders were cranking out back then, that was a huge differentiator. We hit our revenue goals for year one quicker than we had imagined, but our profitability goals lagged for 2 years. When discussing profitability, Gran and Heuer both expressed shock at the sheer number of business owners who are clueless about the basics of it. I mentioned these owners are probably not, quote unquote, active practitioners of business. Now, side note, I'm assuming I put these in quotation marks because this is something the professor said often, and I was probably kissing up to him saying like, hey buddy, you're speaking and I'm listening. Look at this. I put it in quotations and everything. Anyway, back to the story. Both jump on the term I snagged from session 3. Exactly. Every 6 months, we take 3 days and do a total dissection of the P&L, the profit and loss statement. We review our goals and revisit our key metrics. If you do not understand business metrics, why are you even in business? So again, I'm deducing here the 4 anchors in the venture screening process are add significant value, remove pain point, and then there's some sort of allocation of resources or having resources here. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. Resources as a third element? Yeah, that's right. They're nice, but hardly essential. While both founders had excess cash and the enthusiasm to create their own business, they moved very quickly from, we'd love to start something together, to the home building business is booming and we have a mentor and we have a roadmap. And sure, it's easy for guys to downplay resources when they have them, i.e. $100,000 lying around. But I believe them when they said resources were number 3, after adding significant value and after removing pain points. I believe they would have found a way to make it happen even if they weren't able to self-fund. These guys set, track, and achieve goals. One goal they achieved recently was regarding productivity. They noticed there is frequently a 15 or 30-minute lag between when the installers arrived in the morning and when they left for their first install. The diesel fuel burning up in the idle trucks was one thing, but late starts typically rippled out for the remainder of the day. If the first appointment was late, then the second was probably late too. And before you know it, 3 crews were working 10-hour days instead of 8. The answer? Tracking idle morning time and installing GPS units on each truck. The cost? A $600 one-time install fee per truck, plus $250 per month for the analytics and tracking. Now keep in mind, this is in probably January or February of 2011. 3 months in, TCF estimates their annual net savings will be north of $60,000. Heuer emphasized this point. And remember, that $60,000 goes right back to Gran and I. Some observation, creativity, and basic math can return some big numbers when you decide to run your own business. So as 11 o'clock approached, I had a rather large pile of orange crescent halves stacked near my left elbow. I also had over 6 pages of notes on entrepreneurship. While the legibility, it did trail off significantly in the latter pages, stories, stats, and scenarios abounded. There were great stories about common sense and unblemished optimism. There were specific stats on profitability and productivity. There were scenarios breaking down the trade-offs involved in the resource allocation process. It all seemed like great fun. But in the latter stages of the evening, some hostility did break out. A friend of Heuer and Gran joined us around 10 p.m. When the Timmins model, which it doesn't make a big deal, you can Google it if you want. But when the Timmins model was introduced, the friend, a tenured Accenture type, unleashed an unholy diatribe on the absolute selection of opportunity with a capital O as the most important of the 3 elements. Gran shook his head no. Heuer disagreed as well. No way, Arthur Anderson. Team above all else. A blatant opportunity would be nice, and a bunch of available resources would be great, but without a team, the team, man, the other 2 would become nearly insurmountable. Find a partner as committed, sharp, and logical as you, and you'll get everything you've ever wanted. And, as if on cue, the waitress walked by and grabbed my orange halves with 2 hands. Excuse me, sir. Are you done with all these? So, my friends, that is it. That is the paper I wrote on the Countertop Factory, co-founded by Mr. Bill Heuer and Geoff Gran. This is the paper that I submitted in 5870 New Venture Creation to one Professor Kravitz. And the big takeaway for me then and now was the generosity of people in my network who were founders who gave me time and let me pepper them with a bunch of questions that kind of invaded their privacy and were probably a little too much on the nose as I was trying to figure out how the hell I was going to start my own business. And I started my business on August 18th of 2011. So this is, 5 months later, and having these conversations and seeing individuals like Geoff Gran and Bill Heuer talk about the challenges and the fun and the opportunity and just how to use their head to ultimately deliver value, rightly or wrongly, gave me enough confidence to graduate from my MBA program. I had my second kid, and I quit working at the only job I've ever worked at, all within 2 weeks. And their assistance and their insights and their advice were things that I continued to revisit, and obviously revisiting them today. So hopefully these were helpful for you in some small way. And this is a good segue. I'm not going to go on a long intro. Tomorrow's episode, which features Bill, because you just learned a bunch about him. That's where we're going to end this right now. As always, my friends, thank you for listening. You are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.